Hello and welcome. How are you? Welcome to the next installment of Java with Otava, an educational series that's being put out there by Otava for our clients and friends. My name is Nathan Cross. I'm a solutions architect with Otava. And tonight, I just wanted to grab just a little bit of your time, talk about the remote workforce architecture and best practices around that architecture. Our agenda for this evening, right, is to discuss the relevancy of sustaining a remote workforce now, as we're seeing that more common in the marketplace. We want to review infrastructure constructs and talk about some of the best practices of those components, specifically around configuration. And then finally, we want to take a few minutes to look at some ways that Otava can help you achieve success, specifically in this role or in this environment. So let's talk about some relevancy and challenges that we're hearing about, right? So COVID-19, you've heard about it, I've heard about it, and we're probably both tired of talking about it. But it's changed. It's changed the landscape, right? What used to be the exception is now kind of the norm. It's not just the lucky few who get to work from home, right? Now it's pretty much your whole office is working from home for the better part of a few weeks now. And now that we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, we're also hearing chatter that, hey man, this might be the new normal, right? We're hearing that employers are much more willing to embrace a remote workforce, or your buddy in the cube next to you is they're ready to reimburse him for his high-speed internet as opposed to paying for an office lease in some swanky marketplace somewhere, right? So it might not be going anywhere, I guess is what I'm trying to get to. So that being said, remote workforce requires 100% uptime, right? You're now a data center. Resiliency, right, is brought into focus. Will your current infrastructure, is it going to handle the workload? Is it configured correctly? Will it hold up under the workload, right? When you're in the office, downtime is bad. Loss of productivity and revenue is what that means. And now that everyone's remote, it just kind of compounds it. So it's brought into keen focus. So in some workloads requires a certain compliance rules and regulations in order to be compliant. So that puts extra load on your internal IT staff. Maybe they don't have that skill set to know what comprises a PCI compliant RDS farm, or maybe they're already too busy and they don't have time to get to the place where they are familiar, right? So these are just a few of the pain points that we're hearing about out there in the marketplace today. So we shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the constructs of an RDS farm, something that's used quite commonly to sustain a remote workforce. Some of the components that we're looking at here, right? You've got your remote workforce, all your office mates, fellow IT folks. They're going to be working remotely, coming in over the public internet through a VPN, most likely. SSL VPN. Once they hit the perimeter firewalls, they're going to be allowed through or denied based on the policy set on those firewalls, of course. Then that brings us to the remote desktop gateway, the remote desktop web access. Two different names for the same function. One provides or specializes in granting web-based access, while the other is more of a thick client RDS, RDP connection. So we've got a file server within the internal environment, right, for storing those user profiles, the connection broker, which is going to facilitate connectivity from the desktop gateways into the session host, and then the licensing server there, allowing another concurrent connection or denying the connection request based on the amount of RDS licenses you have on hand and installed. That brings us down to the session host, and finally the old domain controller there. So this is, again, we're looking at the architecture necessary for standing up and maintaining a remote workforce of, say, 50 users or so or less. So Microsoft has thrown out some best practices, which we've looked up and put into this slideshow. As we dive just a little bit more into a little bit more detail about some of these components, the remote desktop gateway / web access, right? That's going to be the first box, your first stop that your users are going to face, and it grants users access from public networks over the internet via an RDS session or a web portal, depending on how you have your environment configured. So Microsoft is saying best practice dictates that each one of those servers or server instances, whether they be virtual or on a physical appliance, have 2 cores, 6 gigs of RAM per instance, 80 gigs of hard drive space or virtual disk space. And with smaller environments like this, oftentimes server roles can be condensed into one instance or appliance. For this instance, it looks like we've got them combined here. Moving on to the file server, right? Once the users have come in, they've passed through the firewall. The gateway is going to allow that connection as well. The file servers are what's used to store your user profiles, right? So every time your end user or remote user logs in and gets access into the environment, the presentation looks the same. The desktops are the same. The same icons are on their desktop. This just makes it a more consistent presentation for your users. It cuts down on some confusion, hopefully alleviating calls into the help desk. It just delivers a better end user experience overall. Moving on, the connection broker and or licensing server, right? So the connection broker is going to facilitate connections to the actual session host. The licensing server, this is the server instance that keeps track of how many concurrent connections you can have, how many RDS licenses you have activated and configured in your environment. It looks like here I've got another bullet about the connection broker. Let's say interruption for connectivity is interrupted for one reason or the other. The connection broker will redirect that specific end user to the session host that they were connected to before the interruption took place. So it just kind of helps them get back to where they were with the least amount of interruption as possible. So Microsoft is dictating those server instances have 2 cores, again, virtual or physical. Per server instance, we're looking at about 6 gigs of RAM per server and about 100 gigs of drive space. Moving on, there's the Active Directory domain controller, right? So that's going to, once the users are in, they're authenticated, they're connected to a session host, the applications or resources, directories, file shares, etc., that they have access to is either going to be granted or denied by the domain controller based on a number of different things, end user permissions, group membership, group policy, you name it. They'll have a hand to play in there. So the session host itself, right, is the server instance that holds the actual applications in the desktop environments that the users are trying to get to in the first place, right? This is the key component of everything. Microsoft dictates, our best practice dictates rather that the session host should have 1 core for every 10 to 15 users. And we've seen some fluctuation, right, based on what kind of workload your company does on a daily basis. Obviously, more intensive applications might require a little bit more horsepower there on the session host in terms of compute cores and RAM. But generally speaking, we're looking at 1 core for every 10 or 15 concurrent users. The session host should also have between 450 and 500 megabytes of RAM per user session. So not a whole lot of new terminology here, right? We've all seen and touched these appliances, but that's how we pull it all together to build out an RDS farm, a small RDS farm, right? Suitable for 50 users or less. So we just wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk briefly about how we at Otava can help you out. As you know, we are a hosted services company, and we provide a multitude of different services. Today, we want to talk about some of our cloud platforms in which this RDS farm that we just talked about could be virtualized and hosted. Depending on, maybe you need a little bit more compliance, you need a little bit more granular control, we would recommend a dedicated private cloud for you to host your server instances on. A little bit more control here. It is dedicated infrastructure that only your company would have access to, so there's no sharing of compute resources. If that's not important, we can start talking about two of our platforms that are shared cloud infrastructure models. One being VPC, or virtual private cloud, and one being S-Cloud, or secure cloud, S-Cloud for short. Otava, we do have a multi-market presence with data centers all up and down the Midwest there. We've got a presence in Las Vegas, Manchester, UK, Sydney, Australia. So we're all over. And depending on what cloud platform you need would ultimately dictate what data center your environment's hosted in. But as a whole, all of our data centers are compliance driven, right? That's what Otava is all about. So these cloud platforms come in a fully managed flavor, right? If freeing you up to worry about just the operating system and the applications hosted there on that server. Otava, in that instance, would manage the entire stack up to and including the hypervisor. So that's power, cooling, networking, hardware infrastructure, and the hypervisor itself. You'd have a dedicated account team, right? And one of my main jobs as a solutions architect is to work with your internal IT staff, and we want to take more of a consultative approach versus just selling you stuff, right? So we want to be there in the trenches with you, helping you resolve issues that you might be currently facing by recommending whatever product offering that we have that best suits your needs there in order to serve that issue, or to stay ahead of any kind of upcoming projects that might be coming down the road, right? We like to help you make the most informed decision that you can. Again, dedicated account team and 24/7 support for your environment. Security and continuity obviously come along with compliant data centers, where we're used to managing those firewalls for you. We have some additional offerings that can act as additional layers, right, for your security, including two-factor authentication. Business continuity plans, we can help you come up with those and offer a solution for your business continuity plan through our disaster recovery as a service, one of our disaster recovery as a service platforms. And then in Asterisk here, soon we'll be rolling out backups for Office 365 too, which will be nice. So that's about it. That's about all I have on the agenda for this evening. Thank you for your time. You can see here a few different ways to contact us at otava.com, toll-free number here, an email address to contact us at, and then you can go out to YouTube and look for some other videos that we have posted out there. So anyway, we thank you for your time, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks.